What were some of the fastest finishes in the history of UFC? Let's talk about it. Tito Ortiz vs. Evan Tanner. UFC light heavyweight title, UFC 30. Ortiz knocked out Evan Tanner in 30 seconds. In 2001, when the UFC went from being owned by SEG to the more well-known Zuffa, there was no question who the biggest star was. Light heavyweight champion Tito Ortiz. Ortiz was a loud, trash-talking performer whose wrestling-heavy style wasn't always the most exciting, but it got him a lot of attention and made him famous. When the UFC's first show under new ownership was being planned, Ortiz and challenger Evan Tanner were put in the main event so that Ortiz could keep being the promotion's face. He did not let anyone down, and it might have been the best moment of his career. As soon as the fight started, the two men met in the middle of the octagon. After a low kick and a few punches, Ortiz grabbed Tanner by the body and threw him to the ground. Tanner's head hit the mat hard, and Ortiz didn't need to hit him again. The challenger was out in less than 30 seconds, and the Huntington Beach bad boy had made it to the big leagues. Frank Shamrock vs. Igor Zinoviev. UFC middleweight title, UFC 16. Frank Shamrock is currently not welcome in the UFC because of how outspoken he is and how he got into a fight with UFC President Dana White. However, only a fool would deny him his place as one of the UFC's most dominant champions of all time. Igor Zinoviev's first defense of his middleweight title was not his fastest knockout. More on that later. But it was the hardest. Zinoviev rushed forward and took a couple of leg kicks before he grabbed Shamrock. But the champion had something up his sleeve. He lifted the Russian into the air and then threw him to the ground, smashing his shoulder into the challenger's jaw and knocking him out. The fight lasted only 22 seconds. What's even more amazing is that it was Zinoviev's last fight because he was never able to fully recover from the knockout, which broke his collarbone. It's just too bad that this finish didn't make it onto the UFC's highlight reels today. Frank Shamrock vs. Kevin Jackson. UFC middleweight title, UFC Ultimate Japan. Frank Shamrock won the first UFC middleweight title with this finish. It wasn't as brutal as the next one, but it was 6 seconds faster, giving him 2 UFC titles in 38 seconds. For this fight, Shamrock teamed up with Kevin Jackson, who won an Olympic gold medal in wrestling. Jackson had more UFC experience than Shamrock going into the fight because he had won UFC 14 middleweight. However, Shamrock had more MMA experience overall because he had fought for a long time in Japan and it showed quickly. In the first few seconds of the fight, Shamrock let Jackson take him down. But before Jackson could even think about what he was going to do next, he was tapped out by an armbar. Before this fight, Ken Shamrock was the better known of the Shamrock brothers. After the fight, however, everyone only talked about Frank Shamrock. Ronda Rousey vs. Alexis Davis. UFC bantamweight title, UFC 175. At UFC 175, Ronda Rousey fought Alexis Davis, who wasn't the top contender in the bantamweight division at the time. It felt like a Mike Tyson squash match from the early days of the UFC. And if anyone had any doubts that Rowdy Ronda could do something like this fight changed their minds. Rousey hit Davis with a strong right punch that made her wobble. And before the challenger could respond, the Olympic silver medalist in judo slammed her with a picture-perfect hip throw. Davis fell on her back and was held down by a headlock. Rousey then threw a bunch of punches that knocked Davis out. The fight was over in 16 seconds. Rousey landed 14 big blows in that time. She landed a blow almost every second, and the hip throw took up the other 2 seconds. To say that this was a strong and scary performance would be an understatement. Andrei Arlovski vs. Paul Buentello for the UFC heavyweight title, UFC 55. Nearly every finish on our list shocked and amazed UFC fans. But this one left many confused and even angry until slow-motion replays showed what really happened. Andrei Arlovski defended his UFC heavyweight title against Paul Buentello. Fans were expecting a fight, but Buentello went for a takedown after only 15 seconds, and referee Big John McCarthy jumped in to stop the fight at the same time. When Buentello got up, he was bleeding behind his left eye and looked dizzy and confused. This should have been a red flag. The crowd didn't stop booing until replays showed that Arlovski had dodged a Buentello jab and hit him with a clean right hand that knocked him out instantly and sent him tumbling forwards, making it look like he was trying to take him down. Arlovski's knockout blow is still one of the best counters in UFC history, and his finish of Buentello is the fastest in any UFC heavyweight title fight. It was the Pitbull's second title fight in 2005 to end in less than a minute. 8 months earlier, he won the title by beating Tim Sylvia in 47 seconds. Ronda Rousey vs. Cat Zingano. UFC Bantamweight title, UFC 184. After Cat Zingano weighed in for her defense of her Bantamweight title against champion Ronda Rousey, she just said, "Watch this." The line turned out to be pretty true. The audience could have blinked and missed the fight, but it didn't end the way Alpha Cat wanted it to. Zingano is known for being slow to start, but she wanted to change that, and she came out ready to fight the vicious Rousey. It ended up being a big mistake. As soon as the fight started, Zingano ran out of her corner and threw a flying knee and a punch that just missed Rousey. Both women tried to take the other to the ground, but it was Rousey who did a cartwheel to get on Zingano's back and take control. She then used her famous armbar to force Zingano to submit. Zingano looked confused and upset by the result, as if she couldn't believe what happened. And, to be honest, neither could the people watching. Not only had Rousey pulled off another amazing finish, but she did it in just 14 seconds, against an opponent who was supposed to be her toughest opponent up to that point. Conor McGregor vs. Jose Aldo. UFC featherweight title, UFC 194. At the time, it might have been the most important UFC title fight ever. After more than a year of build-up and a crazy amount of trash talk, Conor McGregor would finally get his chance to fight UFC featherweight champion Jose Aldo. UFC fans had been talking about how the fight would go for a long time, but no one expected it to end in such a crazy way. McGregor was sure of himself from the moment he stepped into the octagon, while Aldo looked stiff and nervous. After a few feints from McGregor, Aldo bit and threw a glancing blow, but the notorious one came back with a picture-perfect left hand that knocked the Brazilian to the ground. McGregor landed a few more blows, but they didn't matter because Aldo was out in just 13 seconds. Everyone knew that McGregor's left hand was as sharp as a coffin now, but did Aldo let the Irishman get into his head? Had he just given in to the pressure? Or was McGregor just really good at defending against attacks? In reality, it didn't really matter because McGregor had lived up to the hype and become the most famous UFC fighter in history in just 13 seconds. Thanks for watching this video. Stay tuned for more.